Hello, welcome to Video Mania 2. I'm the dude manning the counter, Duncan, and today we are going to talk about Masters of the Universe from 1987. It was released by Cannon Films. It stars Dolph Lundgren, Frank Langella, and Courtney Cox. And Dolph Lundgren and Courtney Cox were just starting out. I think this was the first thing Courtney Cox did after the Bruce Springsteen video, I think. Don't hold me to that. And it was Dolph Lundgren. It was his first leading role, and I believe it was what he did right after Rocky IV. But don't hold me to that either. But they were early in their careers, that's for sure. So, this movie is very interesting. Masters of the Universe, He-Man, was a very hot item when I was a kid. In the early to mid-80s, He-Man was the man. I mean, the Masters of the Universe was very popular. The toys sold off the shelves. The cartoon was watched every morning. I mean, I had a bunch of the toys. Not enough to suit me, but I had a lot of them. And, there were so many things. The vehicles, the castle play sets, and all the different action figures. And I had several of the He-Man figures. I think my favorite one was He-Man. It was this one that you would turn, and you put these little caps, and you turn it when he was on a spring, and his hips would pop, and he'd throw a punch, and the cap would pop, so it made a little popping sound. I always thought that was cool. But I was a He-Man fan, from since I could remember, when I would watch cartoons. If He-Man was on, that's what I stopped to do. Now, He-Man was actually interesting. It was a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi because it was kind of primitive in a way, but futuristic as well. It was an interesting combination. It was like Conan the Barbarian and Star Wars thrown together. Like, they lived in castles, and it was kind of medieval in a way, and there was sorcery and stuff. But they also had spaceships and different tanks and stuff that was, really futuristic. So it was a really cool universe. And He-Man was, of course, very powerful. Now, this movie, Mattel owned the rights to He-Man. And Cannon Films, which was more known for cheap action movies, they did not spend a lot of money. Their economic strategy was make movies so cheap they'll always make money because they don't have a lot to make back up. But this was a big budget for them. This budget was reportedly $17 million, which back then was, in 1987, pretty substantial budget. For Cannon Films, that's astronomical for what they do. Like, American Ninja films were made for about $500,000, maybe $1 million at the most. So this was a step up for them, as far as production budget. And the movie flopped. He-Man was, by the time it was released in 87, He-Man came out in like 83 to 85, and 86 was his peak. And he started declining, and people were into Thundercats, and G.I. Joe always held up. And He-Man still had a following, but not as big as it was. So he fell off a little bit. Now, when the movie came out, so it wasn't as big of a deal. Had it come out in 1984, oh my God, the thing would have been massive. But, it's one of those timing things. And the movie changed a lot of things. There were different characters. Like Dolph Lundgren was He-Man, which was perfect casting. But, they go to Earth, which isn't uncommon for a lot of adaptation to video games and stuff. If it's in a different universe, they somehow have a story that comes to Earth. I guess that way, so general audiences can relate. So I understand that. So that wasn't a big deal. What I think hurt it, though, like I said in the beginning, is He-Man was not as popular as he was at his peak. And they changed a lot of things with the Earth characters. Courtney Cox played Julie, and her character was actually quite well developed, and she had a boyfriend. It was a pretty good story there, so that helped. Now, but I think people were just turned off, and, people just didn't give it a look. They just thought it was a Star Wars ripoff, and there is a lot of Star Wars similarities. But what I kind of noticed when I look at it now, and I loved it when I was a kid. My dad took me to see it in the theaters. But I think because they changed some things, because He-Man wasn't Prince Adam and then turned into He-Man, he was always He-Man, and Battle Cat wasn't there, and Orko wasn't there. They had some different characters. Now, Battle Cat, I can understand. Even a massive budgeted movie for that time. Battle Cat would have been impossible to pull off, having He-Man ride a Battle Cat. Nowadays wouldn't be an issue, but back then that just wasn't possible. And Orko, who was the comic relief of the whole universe there, they didn't have him. I had read reports, I don't know how true it is, that they tried something, but he hovers around, and back then it just couldn't be done. It was just too much trouble, and Cannon was on a shoestring budget for a production like this, so out Orko went. And they replaced him with like Gwildor, who was this little key maker that's how they get to Earth. He makes like a cosmic key, and they can travel to different dimensions and areas. So the story itself, though, is pretty good, and the special effects, for the most part, there's a few 80s cheesy special effects, but it holds up. And the reason I like this film for what it is it stays true to the He-Man character, the mythology. It's still respected, and the movie was made with love. You could tell the people behind it, looked up the Mattel line, and for the most part, I mean, they had to add new characters and do their own spin on it, for different logistical reasons I mentioned earlier. But overall, the love and the lore is there. And every time I watch it, it brings a smile to my face. And I think it's overall, I see why it's a cult classic. I really like it. It came out in the 80s, flopped, and was forgotten about, but kind of gained some favor over the years. When people look back at it, when you see different adaptations, like, you know what? It was made with love. It has some cool things, and the nostalgia is there. And they do get in some of the, stuff that He-Man does, like when he's fighting with Skeletor, who Frank Langella hits a home run with his performance. He's awesome in this. I mean, he goes over the top and really dives into it, and you can tell he was having a blast. But he's zapping, He-Man with his powers, and then He-Man grabs the sword and screams, "I have the power," and I jumped out of, I jumped out of my seat. I'm like, okay, it's still there. And so even though most of it takes place on Earth, and there are some different things, and it is a little strange at times, and cheesy and campy, I absolutely love it. And it's a cult classic now, and it deserves to be. And it's kind of a shame it didn't get the recognition it deserved at the time, because Cannon Films, this really started, unfortunately, part of its legacy is it hurt Cannon Films because Cannon spent so much money, and then they were mismanaged, and so they lost a lot of money. It was very unfortunate, because now, gained a lot of favor, and it's, a good sci-fi fantasy classic, in my opinion. So I think it's great. So that's my take on it for the most part. All the acting was pretty good. Everybody kept pretty serious with it. So what do you think of Masters of the Universe? Are you excited about the new Masters of the Universe on Netflix? The animation looks good, so I'm excited. I hope it's good. I really am pulling for Kevin Smith to pull this off, so I'm excited for that. Are you excited for that? What do you think of this movie? Do you think it deserves to be a cult classic? Let me know any of those things. Let me know in the comments. And like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. And good journey.